Hi everyone, I'm the Limitless Librarian and this is my review of Psyche and Eros by Luna McNamara. This is a retelling of a Greek myth, that being, well, the myth of Psyche and Eros, as you may have guessed. Me being a huge Greek mythology fan, this bad boy was right up my alley, so it was only natural I pick it up. And being familiar with the Greek myth of Psyche and Eros, obviously I was very curious to see what they would do with it, particularly as it's not as involved, or it doesn't feel like a myth that has as much of a journey to it compared with a lot of traditional Greek myths concerning heroes like Perseus or Heracles or Theseus. It didn't feel like the sort of myth that would lend itself that well to an adaptation, so I was curious to see what would be done with it. So, how did this book do? Where did it deviate from the original myth? How faithful an adaptation is it? Does it add to the myth? Is it a good book on its own? Tune in to find out. So normally I start my reviews by saying what the book is about, but because this is a retelling of the Greek myth, I should probably run through the myth in a general form for the sake of those who are not familiar with the original story that this book is based off of. The myth itself, and I'll tell you now, the story itself definitely deviates quite a bit from the myth and expands upon a lot of things in it, changing some things as well. So telling the myth story doesn't really spoil the book. If it did, then there wouldn't really be much point in those of us who are familiar with the myth picking up this retelling, if it was just literally retelling the events of the myth and nothing else. So, as with a lot of Greek myths, there are different interpretations. Some versions of Greek mythology make Eros out to be one of the original primordial gods, the first beings that existed before the Olympian gods, before the Titans, before the world itself. Other versions of Greek mythology, other myths, other writers, make him the son of Aphrodite and usually Ares. In either case, he is the god and thus personification of desire, and generally sort of romantic love, but more so desire and sexual desire. His Roman name is Cupid, so if you know what that kind of image conjures up, then you sort of have an idea. Winged god with arrows that can make anybody hit with them fall in love with people. Psyche, meanwhile, is a mortal girl who through one form or another ends up offending Aphrodite, usually by being compared to her because Psyche is considered to be remarkably beautiful. And Aphrodite does not take kindly to any kind of person who might be compared to her level of beauty. So she made it so that Psyche would be sacrificed. However, through one reason or another, Eros fell in love with her, whether he was tasked by Aphrodite with being involved in that sacrifice or with trying to diffuse the situation before it came to that, or because he himself got accidentally stabbed with his own arrow during whatever process. And so he rescued Psyche from the sacrifice, whisked her away to some secret private palace of his, and they became lovers, except Psyche was not allowed to know who Eros was. She was not allowed to look upon him, so she only saw him at night time, and he forbade her from shining any sort of light into his room. Now, this arrangement was generally pretty good for Psyche. She had a pretty good life up there, and she liked Eros. She had no problems with him or with their unusual arrangement. However, she did become homesick for her old life. And so this is where her two sisters, that she had these two sisters, and she wanted to see them. And so they were brought up to her palace, but they were jealous of the life of luxury that Psyche lived. And so after she told them about the arrangement, they convinced her to go against Eros's instruction and try and look upon him. So that night, when she went to bed with him, she took a lit candle to look upon him, and instead of the monster that they had painted him as, because why else would he not want Psyche to look at him, she saw the beautiful winged man in bed with her. However, some wax fell from the candle, and it burned Eros, woke him up, and he had to leave her because she knew who he was. And without Eros, Psyche could not stay in the palace that he had made for her, so she was tossed back down to the mortal world alone. And through one means or another, she managed to make a deal with Aphrodite that if she could perform 3 impossible tasks, that then Aphrodite would reunite them. However, as I said, the tasks were physically impossible for any human person to accomplish. However, through one means or another, she did get assistance with them, and so was able to fulfill the deal and reunite with Eros, and she was eventually made a goddess of the human soul. So that's generally the rough story of Psyche and Eros, the myth itself. So as for the book, Psyche and Eros by Luna McNamara, it deviates quite a bit from this story. It, for one thing, Eros in this story manages to be both the primordial version and Aphrodite's adoptive foster son, which was kind of weird. Also, Psyche's sisters are absent, even though they are a crucial part of the original myth, since they're the reason why Psyche broke her word to Eros and looked upon him. Instead, Eros has a friendship with Zephyrus, the god of the west wind, and he's a major character who both helps and hinders them. He's kind of salty for Eros's part in the demise of his lover Hyacinthus, but at the same time they were friends from very early on in their lifetimes, and Zephyrus is remorseful for the mistakes that he makes, including being the reason why Psyche and Eros in this version have to separate. Also, in this version, Psyche and Eros are both characterized more than in their original versions. Psyche is the princess of Mycenae and a descendant of the hero Perseus, and a prophecy was made about her before she was born that she would conquer a great monster. And so she was trained basically from birth to be a great hero. She was given all this training. She was taught by Atalanta of the Argonauts. She was good at archery. She fought monsters herself. So yeah, they definitely made her a strong female protagonist of her. I guess attempting to make her be someone who makes things happen rather than someone to whom things happen, which is how she was in the original myth. Instead of a sacrifice necessitating Eros's rescue of her, what happens is that Eros is tasked by Aphrodite with cursing her with one of his arrows, but he accidentally pricks himself with the arrow and falls in love with Psyche. And so he figures out with Zephyrus a plan to be with her after trying different things that were unsuccessful in trying to cure his love sickness. This culminates in Zephyrus destroying a village in order to create the illusion of a monster that needs to be defeated, which of course lures Psyche, thinking that this is her destiny calling, and that leads to Zephyrus whisking her up to Eros's palace. We do go through other beats of the myth, like of course the 3 tasks, and unlike in the original myth, Psyche plays a more active role in them, although she does also have assistance in some form. However, that assistance is granted because of her deeds, not just because she begged for it and someone answered the call. So what did I think of this book? Honestly, it feels kind of weird to me. As I said, this is a myth that doesn't really feel like it lends itself well to an adaptation because, as I alluded to, Psyche is not much of an active protagonist. Things happen to her as opposed to her making things happen, at least in the original myth. And so this book tried to correct that, and in some ways it succeeded, but it didn't really go all the way. And it was a similar story with Eros. Things happened to him, and it was only very rarely at the end that he made things happen, and Psyche made things happen, and even then it was only with assistance, and only after everything else had kind of failed. They needed to be pressured to be proactive. Also, the love story between them also felt a bit weird, partly because of course, the whole arrow of love causing these feelings artificially rather than them happening organically. Given that that was the method by which the author chose to make Eros fall for Psyche, I don't think there's any really non-weird way to make that work. And Psyche, throughout the story, through her unconventional, for females at the time, upbringing, was not really interested in love or marriage. And that while, characters like her can still fall in love, and she had this whole conversation with Atalanta about that, in this case it didn't really feel as earned, even when she did reciprocate Eros's feelings. It kind of still felt like she had to accept this match because most females in ancient Greece did not get to choose their match, and she encountered a lot of women who were in that situation and the consequences of that through her family. So it kind of felt like she had to be happy, she should be happy, she should make herself be happy with this match, because what she had with Eros was better than like 90% or more of the outcomes of other marriages for women that she had seen and or heard about. I wouldn't say it was as bad as she just settled, but it was more like she didn't really have any other options. So when this whole Eros thing came her way and it was good, she had to do what she had to keep it, because otherwise she would end up in a worse situation. As an adaptation, or I guess a retelling of this myth, I think it works fine. I mean, it does what the myth, it hits all the story beats of the original myth, but expands upon them and gives all the characters involved more depth and expands upon how the events that took place happened. And it does manage to make Psyche feel a bit more heroic and a bit more like a protagonist who is fighting for what she wants than the original myth does. But it just didn't quite go all the way there. And her portrayal just kind of felt like the stereotypical strong female protagonist trademark. It felt like, the whole thing that we've seen before, dismissing and mocking all things feminine, not wanting anything to do with love. She hits all those beats of eschewing anything feminine and not wanting anything to do with it, hating all the feminine aspects that do happen anyway, like her being beautiful, and not really exploring, whether she wants to adopt these other interests as well. Like, it's okay to not be into stereotypically girly things, but also still like the occasional girly thing. It doesn't make you any less cool or epic or have less potential or heroic or anything like that if you do like being pretty or, sewing or cooking or any of the stereotypical girly things that Psyche just mocks and wants nothing to do with. Like, she can be a monster-slaying archer with a prophecy to her name, and also a girl, a woman who, likes other feminine things as well as the more stereotypically masculine pursuits. That's okay. And this book just doesn't really do that. It doesn't let her explore wanting to be a woman or anything, and it just hits all of the beats that a story like that will hit. So regarding the whole you wanting to be more of a feminist story, a more feminist take on the myth, and wanting to make her a more active and strong protagonist, it doesn't really do anything new with the idea. I like the idea of making Psyche a more active protagonist, but it didn't look like anything I hadn't seen before in that regard, I guess. The one character I was interested in the story was Zephyrus, who was, basically the third main character aside from Psyche and Eros themselves. Because I liked how he kind of made mistakes and did things, but then was remorseful for them, and kind of did grow invested in the relationship as the story progressed. And, he did some bad things, he did some good things. He was more interesting than either of the two leads, honestly. So, in summary, I guess this is a fine book, and it does what it needed to do. It adapts the myth of Psyche and Eros, but the things that it chooses to do are just too weird or too stereotypical and not original enough for me to think of it as anything remarkable in regards to the Greek mythology genre of books and retellings. The only thing remarkable about it is that it's a retelling of a myth that we don't get many retellings of. Like, Hades and Persephone done to death, for example. But this one, I don't really see many retellings of Psyche and Eros. It does incorporate some other Greek myths into the background of the story, like the Trojan War, and they meet Prometheus. So I guess if you like Greek mythology, it's also fun to sort of explore those in the background as well. But yeah, I just don't think this really adds anything to that genre. And the whole thing is just weird. The relationship is weird primarily because of the setup, and also because the protagonists, while more active than the original myth versions, were not as active as you would want protagonists of a novel to be. So thank you for watching. If you liked the video and you'd like to see more book reviews, please like and subscribe. And with that out of the way, as always, do lots of maths, read lots of books, and I'm sure you'll have a lovely day.